I am joined with the man of the hour, Arnaud Develay. How you doing, my man? You doing all right?
Hello, Jamal. I'm fine. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad that you can join me. Women straight right here. Excellent. Arnaud, he is a author, political analyst, and international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. His latest book is Foreign Entanglements: Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of the American Political Consensus. I'm happy that you could join me, man. There's a lot of news to discuss. I guess one of the big items is that Donald Trump has stopped sharing intel, weapons, all of these things effectively with Ukraine. He is also apparently talking to opposition of Zelensky in Ukraine. And the most recent thing had to do with him effectively saying, we are not going to defend countries that are not paying their fair share into NATO. Um, Give me your overall take. Let's put the NATO thing to the side for the moment. What does it mean for Ukraine that the US has stopped sharing intelligence and stopped sharing military support for the country?
Well, I guess we haven't seen the end of the fallout from last week. I don't know how to call it. Theater.
Bitch fest.
Yeah, slugfest. I don't know. I call it the Sukkah sequence. If we reference to the insult that Zelensky hurled at JD Vance.
What does
Anyhow,
that mean in Russian, by the way? What does that mean in Russian?
well, well, it
You can
means you're
say
my hoe. You're a hoe.
it.
Actually, it's a gut.
Imagine him
Yeah, yeah.
calling
It's
the
a
vice president effectively a
yeah.
hoe. Just
Uh,
amazing.
anyhow, okay. So let's take a step back and look at this whole thing. What's been going on? Going back to the KSA meeting. Okay, we have now Moscow and Washington endeavoring to reestablish bilateral relationship, as in amongst two responsible great powers. So sure, Ukraine features front and center, but there are other files also of mutual interest to the extent mature discussions are what predominates, as in between the two diplomatic corps. Now, as far as the Ukraine file is concerned, and as far as Trump is personally concerned, owing to the fact that he somewhat substantially ran for president on putting an end to that conflict, one has to take into account that first he had to somewhat appraise himself of what really is the geopolitical nature of the conflict, what are its root causes. Uh, and in so doing, he has to muddle through all the bulwarks that he's been served, undoubtedly, trying to understand and develop for himself a clearer understanding thereby of Russian point of view. So, at least that's my understanding. And that of the people immediately around him, like the J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, who are his top guys. I mean, we have State and we have the VP, which is more than a VP. Like he's not like what Pence used to be. He's more like his right hand man, enforcer, who's touted as the heir at some point down the road. So there's almost like a symbiotic relationship between Trump and Vance. I understand now why Vance was picked up. Anyhow, so uh, the first order of business in trying to understand upon whom Trump and Trump's team can count on, is to try to identify whether or not Zelensky, for lack of anybody else at that point by default, is someone willing to play ball. Well, we know now, if I was in Trump's position, I have every evidence in my possession to know that Zelensky is definitely not the guy you want to run with. Zelensky is in it for Zelensky and his sponsors, to the extent that those sponsors want continued conflict for a whole range of reasons, which we're not going to get into right now. But uh, Zelensky's job is to continue the conflict. That's what he was programmed for. That's the software that animates him. Whenever he goes anywhere in the world, he basically hands out, his hat and say, we're fighting for freedom. We almost are fighting for your own security, but we need help. That's the one-liner. That's what defines him. So when there are notions being introduced in the equation bearing on a ceasefire, immediately that software starts going crazy. Like, it's got like those kind of hiccups and bugs. And Trump has seen that, because after those 40 minutes, 40 some minutes talking to him, he would have expected, somehow the meeting to go as planned, the guy to say, basically to concede on the principle of putting an end to the conflict, sign that mineral deal and go home. Everybody would have been happy, and that would have made for great photo ops. The problem is that he reverted true to form. Zelensky, that is, reverted true to form when he said we need security guarantees. Security guarantees was never going to be part of any kind of discussions, especially not in front of the media, which is why Trump allowed this whole sequence to go on, so that the media, the whole world media, could see that the guy, was not a reasonable person. He's not first and foremost interested in a ceasefire, and to the extent he might want to hear or talk about it, it's automatically attached to security guarantees, which, from Trump's perspective, when you poured X amount of billion of dollars plus military assistance, intelligence, etc., assistance and security guarantees, you've had them. You had the chance. Now, this is where Trump will try to rescue you, the uniparty argument at this point in time, right now, as we speak, is you are a sovereign country. You had the chance to put an end to this, and you decided to take it upon yourself to confront Russia. And at some point, you came to us, asked for help, and we helped you. Of course, the reality is nothing like that, but this is Trump's way of selling it to the American public. So obviously, for this purpose alone, Zelensky is out for all intended purpose. So then on top of it, Zelensky came back a couple of days later. He said, we're willing to sign that deal and not discuss things that, might ride the White House. But then a few days later, he's in Brussels with all the European poodles, and it's war, yeah, war. So in the White House now, that's it. We're done with this guy. So the idea now is to try to find somebody with whom the White House can play ball. And this is, so they're trying to put, obstacle in the currently structured political figures in Ukraine. They want to try to undermine Zelensky. They cannot coup him. This would be too obvious, even the most, what you might call it, uninformed person would somewhat connect the dot that this has something to do with what happened in Washington. So they can't do it like right out. Like, they have to somehow be a little bit more subtle. So this would explain why we've had those announcements bearing on the stopping sharing intelligence, bearing on a suspension of aid at some point, in Poland at least. But it's not going to make a big difference on the battlefield, because Ukraine can go on at their current rate for the next 6 months at least. So it's really a symbolical
You think
gesture.
so? Really?
Yeah. Yes.
Without U.S. support, they can just keep barreling along.
Well, because the U.S. support, quote unquote, has been delivered a long time ago with 6 months supply extra compared to the point in time when we discussed the issue. Mm-hmm. So there are enough U.S. supply for the next 6 months already in theater. That's how, yeah, that's
burning.
That's through. How bad. Yeah. That's just, it's like if they kept paying, if they kept providing, additional packages, it would just extend that 6 months reserve further.
Okay, what about artillery, for example? I mean, artillery. Ukraine was burning through artillery like water.
They can go on for a while again. I
Okay.
mean, the regular artillery. Yeah, they can. Now, what's a little bit more problematic is the use of those long-range missiles.
Hmm.
And to the extent, and this was obviously highlighted by many commentators the last 6 months, all the Western capital basically gave the green light to Zelensky to use them. We know those can't be operated without satellite intelligence.
Yeah, U.S. Intel.
So that's the one that we're really focusing on right now, and this prevents any kind of escalation and the conflict to somehow veer completely out of control. So on that particular point, yes, this is actually an important step. Now, we've had rumors that the Trump administration has been talking to people in Ukraine. But I mean, who have they been talking to? From what I understand, they've been talking to really losers. I mean,
Right.
Timoshenko, the gas princess, she's toxic. Poroshenko, he played along with the Biden, team. He reneged on the Minsk Accord. It's under his administration in Ukraine that the Minsk Accord were completely trampled. So
Hmm.
he's not a reliable partner. Kiev's
Zelensky
mayor,
has
Klitschko,
been.
and Zelensky, on top of it, Zelensky just came out yesterday, I think, and accused Trump of betraying the world order.
Yep.
I mean, you don't demand that. I mean, it's like, so obviously we know that Zelensky is basically kowtowing to his sponsors who happens to be in London. So Zelensky, as I said, is London's candidate. So they have to find somebody else, and I don't think they have anybody right now, to be honest.
What is the guy
We
that's
talked
in
about
Russia? There,
Arestovich. There's Arestovich who could be an option, but you got to build him up, and you really have the time to build him up. Does he have like a lot of relays in Ukraine?
yeah.
He's left Ukraine. He's on the run. So how do they have to go with someone who's somewhat still connected to power centers in Ukraine. And everybody who's left in that situation in Ukraine are lame, rotten branches to sit on,
Yeah.
to be honest. So I don't
Well,
know.
real quick,
This is what things are kind of
real,
dragging, you know.
just to interrupt real quick. There's a gentleman that Russia traded for in order to get him out of Ukraine. He was part of the opposition party. I can't think of his name though.
Medvedchuk.
That's his name. What
Yeah.
about him?
But
He was
Medvedchuk might be thrown into the ring at some point when we have when Washington has resolved in a way their own need to lean on someone who's reliable.
I see.
You see, uh, and we have somewhat a working understanding on creating the conditions for an election to take place as early as possible. And then Russia will probably push Medvedchuk, which happens to be, as far as for the Russian-speaking people, still remaining in what's left of Ukraine. It could be a good option to protect and promote their interest.
I see.
So, but I don't think they will introduce him at this point in time. It's too early. It's too
Mhm.
early in the game. Right now, Washington is trying to get someone in Ukraine who can only and solely and exclusively relay and adopt Washington's line on the conflict. And Zelensky is not it. So that's the problem right now for the Trump house, the White House. It's
Mhm.
they need someone, they need a relay, they need a partner, a reliable someone to play ball in Ukraine. And Zelensky is too beholden to a lot of various interests. Who, by the way, I would assume, told him that the moment you play along with Trump, we'll drop you. We'll actually drop you, like, literally. Trump might not go as far as dropping you, like in that sense, but we will. We won't
You're
allow
talking about
anyone
take
to
his
come.
life. You're saying that's the
Yeah,
end of him
yeah,
breathing,
yeah,
effectively. Yeah.
definitely. Because in Ukraine, there are a lot of people who are willing to take on Zelensky's job and get paid, get their payday in that sense. All the while, promoting the same line. We're resisting
Mhm.
aggression. We're fighting for your values. We don't want to be sold on the altar of, Trump, Putin's interest. Cutting a deal in our back. A lot of people are willing to do, for the simple reason that they're compromised themselves, owing to their own stints as prime minister of Ukraine going back to 2004. Whether it's
Mhm.
Timoshenko, whether it's Poroshenko, those people are all corrupt to the core. So I think this explains also why things are somewhat kind of slow to pick up. Because right now, like the Russians said, they have somewhat of a delegation and an emissary ready, waiting in the wings, but they're waiting for the Trump administration to unveil who's going to be their negotiating team. And thus
Right.
far, we don't know. We still don't know because they have all those issues to come up with. In a way, it's the what's the expression? The cat that calls the kettle back, or the
Oh,
kettle
right,
that
right,
calls the
right,
cat.
right,
Yeah,
right.
it's that this is a legacy of the of U.S. policy for the last going back to at least 2014, if not before that. Is that you took over the country. It's become this kind of a zombie. It's only
Hmm.
on life support because you want it.
Right.
You control the legislative agenda. You control any kind of anybody who sneezes in Ukraine. America knew about it. It was like an extension, a direct extension of American foreign policy in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
So you can't just disengage yourself like this. Do a 180-degree on the fundamental uh, agenda, which
Mhm.
you promoted yourself, and that you enrolled all your allies in the collective West to partake in,
Yeah.
and hope that by somehow getting into office, you're going to press on a button and overnight redo all that. It's impossible. It's
Hmm.
impossible. And like I said, anybody who might be willing to somewhat go with Washington's line, they left the country. They have no way to cultivate relays and support inside the country in a way that would somehow make their run for president, credible.
What about bending somebody into form? I mean, because if you think about it, Rubio, Kellogg, many of the Republicans that are backing Donald Trump, Lindsey Graham, none of these people agree with Trump's policy. All of them are following the same line. Meaning, even though they don't necessarily accept what Donald Trump is trying to do, none of them would say it. In Rubio, he looks like a different person. Like he has
Yes,
been
he does.
very clear. Hegseth, same thing.
Yeah,
Like,
because a neocon. I mean, Rubio is known as a neocon, hardcore.
yeah, exactly. And so, is it possible to find somebody who maybe not necessarily agrees, but is bent into shape anyway?
You know, I mean, if I was in the White House and I was advising Trump, I would put a coin on Arestovich,
Mhm.
because Arestovich, at the end of the day, I don't see anybody else who's come out in the open. Also, keep in mind, there's another guy whose name we haven't mentioned, and who somehow like alluded that he would want to run for office. That's Alexander Dubinsky. Alexander Dubinsky, who's got all the nuggets, also on the Burisma affair and all this,
Yeah.
but who knew too much, and that's the reason why Congress never subpoenaed him, because he would have really spilled the beans. This guy is in jail right now on charges of treason in Ukraine. He's a member of the Rada,
Mhm.
although he's now listed as an independent, but he got elected as a member of Zelensky's party. Also, Dubinsky happens to be on the list of sanctioned person in Russia for
Well,
fomenting Russophobia, at the time when he was following, the winds of political opportunism. He aligned himself with people with whom now, that led him to being on the list, going back to 2018. So it's, again, I think Arestovich would, in the end, he has a great communication skills. He
do
knows
you trust him?
Zelensky.
Do you trust him?
Well,
I mean, because
I don't
he's
trust any
gotten
of those guys.
fair enough. I mean, because
Bottom line.
Arestovich, Spinmeister, when he came in with
Yes,
Zelensky, he has now become
he
very
presents
critical.
well. Yes, and he says truth. I mean, he even said recently that if he was elected, he would send Zelensky to jail for life.
Yeah, I saw that.
I guess his platform would be, I'm not Zelensky. I know him, and I'm not him. And not to mention, he came out really, really early uh, during the conflict in opposition to Zelensky. You
Mhm.
can't take that away from him. Meaning that he's not blood soaked like the others who somehow either rhetorically, actively, affirmatively, and or through abstention, have endorsed Zelensky's policies.
Right.
Because again, it is a dictatorship. Opposition
Mhm.
parties were banned, and to the extent you expressed your disagreement with Zelensky, you would be finding yourself in jail
Okay.
or worse. Yes. So Arestovich leaving the country is a sign that he's the real deal. The
Mhm.
thing now is that you got to build him up from scratch, and you got to do it fast. So you're gonna have to spend, commit, support, resources, and use that spin machine. The problem is, how do you get the legacy media to endorse someone who is not Zelensky after having
All of
fawned
these
over Zelensky?
years. Yeah.
That's the problem. You need the whole legacy media to play ball.
Oh, that's interesting. That is super interesting because that's what Trump is trying to do. And, he's like, all
He
right, we
needs
need
a
Zelensky
partner
to go
on the
away.
ground. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they need somebody on the ground. Let me ask you
So
this.
he's
Oh,
yeah.
no,
No,
please
go ahead.
continue. Well,
No, I was gonna say. I mean, I think that explains also partially why Trump is somewhat trying to undermine, Ukrainian capacity to do too much damage. You know, because again, we have a crazy, cooked up cocaine man clown behind the wheel right now, who is completely unpredictable,
mhm,
unmanageable. And who only knows one thing is that he loves to be president, quote unquote, whatever that means, because he's getting paid.
yeah,
That's the role of his life. So what happens to comedian when the curtain falls? They go back into darkness, obscurity. It's over. So the guy thrives on this. We have to understand the psychology behind, what makes Zelensky get up and somehow carry on every day, despite the fact that the optics are increasingly looking bad as far as he's concerned. He's
yeah.
anything but a genuine item as far as being a head of state is concerned. And it shows.
Well, the majority of people in Ukraine want to end the war. The majority of the people in the
Yes,
United
yes.
States wants to end the war. And the view of Zelensky in the US has gotten markedly worse, like significantly worse over the course of the last few years. Tell me what happened to him. Like when Zelensky got in, he got in on a peace ticket. The entire point was I'm going to fulfill the Minsk agreements. I'm going to, make friends with Russia. We don't need to be at odds. We don't need to be at war. How did that change? What was the transition between that guy who got elected to I am now going to fight forever if I need to?
Well, there was never any transition. It was all like a psy-hop
I
from
see.
the yeah. He was plucked out of the doldrum by this Ukrainian Israeli oligarch named Igor Kolomoisky.
Hmm.
who was a relay of the Soros sphere in Ukraine, a local partner of the Soros Open Society and all the NED, all the CIA stuff. So he basically propped up. That's what they did. They took him out from the obscurity and they turned him into a golem.
Hmm.
And the idea was to present him as hold on.
Oh, there you are. You're fine. He'll be back. He'll be back. He's running into a few difficulties. He'll be back in a moment. I was laughing at the golem comment. They turned him into a golem. There you are.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me, Arnaud?
Hold on.
Can you hear me? I can see you, but I can't hear you.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, but you're very low.
Hold on. Let me get out and come back in.
Oh, yeah, I can hear you. Okay. There we are. I can hear you. Okay. He'll be back. He'll be back. Ran into a few sound difficulties. I was fascinated by the change with Zelensky, to be honest. And I wasn't sure what was going on with that. Whether it was he was just lying in order to get elected, or he actually did mean it, got in office, somebody put a gun to him and said, dude, if you go along this pathway, we will put a bullet in you. In which case, he immediately became the golem, as Arnaud pointed out. It could be either, right? I found it to be radically sad. And what I mean by that, if you have a population and the population goes onto a war footing, fair enough. Maybe there are legit reasons for the population to go onto a war footing. But when you have a population and the population says, we do not want war, we explicitly don't want war, and as evidence of the fact that we don't want war, we're voting for this guy. And then that guy gets in and does the opposite of what he said and the opposite of what the public wanted. And in doing the opposite of what the public wanted, ends up getting a million people killed or damaged permanently. That is tragic when you think about it. Meaning that takes this from the level of a catastrophe into something even worse. There you are. Welcome back.
Sorry about
No,
that.
you're perfectly fine. You're perfectly fine. You were effectively pointing out, well, I was telling the audience how sad all of that is. Like to have a guy who sells this idea that I'm the peace candidate. I want to make good friends with Russia. I want to bring this to bed. And then immediately goes into this kind of war footing. The public didn't want it. And yet that's what the public ended up getting, to the tune of all of these people being killed. But you were saying that ultimately, no, he just lied. He just lied.
Yeah. Well, Poroshenko was somewhat past his valid date of peremption. He expired.
Yeah.
So he was just not popular. And again, Poroshenko, there was a speech he made in 2015 where he threatened all the inhabitants of then uh, eastern Ukraine, Donbass area, and in particular, to basically deprive them, to relegate them to second-class citizen. Basically, that they would not get access to retirement. They would not get paid their retirement. Their kid would not go to school. They would be living in basements. All this while he's basically allowing the Ukrainian armed forces to shell civilian areas every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time the special military operation started, we're talking about 14,000 civilian casualties there. So that guy, for that reason, had to, they had to come up with someone who would be more charismatic, a little bit less, Poroshenko looked this kind of like old Soviet style way of communication, not good.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when they plugged that Zelensky. Zelensky, on top of it, made his career by and large in Russia. He's known in Russia back in the 1990s, if not 2000, into 2000s, I would say. He was famous in Russia.
Mhm.
So that presented an interesting thing for his handlers, in that he could parlay this record of having lived in Russia, worked in Russia,
Spoke Russian.
politically spoke Russian. Yeah. So his father is a veteran of the Great Patriotic War. So the guy had, on the paper, he had impeccable credentials. So they sold him like that. On top of it, he was funny. They had somehow manipulated and forced public opinion, because prior to his political foray, he was the host, if not the star, of a show called Servant of the People in Ukraine, where all the corrupt people were basically shot. And the whole series, the whole TV series, was about a guy. That's precisely what happened to him, who basically comes out of nowhere and decides to get into politics to clean national politics out of from the corrupt. So you
Wow.
cannot make that up.
Yes. Wow.
And so his party ended up being called the same name of the show, Servant of the People.
That is so. That wouldn't even make a good TV show, right? I mean, like, it's too on the nose.
I know, but it's the bigger it is, the easier it gets through. It's a quote from Goering, but during the Nuremberg trials, about imposing narrative. The
Yeah.
bigger the lie, the better the score.
Yeah.
So so then it turned it into a somewhat it was a show. It was a casting job. And he got cast for the job, and the idea was to basically dull public opinion. And in dulling public opinion, when this Ukrainian army was built and fitted with equipment and ready to be unleashed onto the Donbass and beyond, and Crimea, everybody would be somehow sold to the idea that it was Russia who had committed the aggression.
Oh, I see what you mean. We elected the guy who wanted to make peace. He did everything he could. He couldn't make peace.
Exactly. Yeah.
Winston Churchill. I see.
It's the contrast also between he and Vladimir Putin, obviously, right? That was exploited. That was the whole psyop, was to somehow say, here we have a guy, he could be the guy next door, he could marry your daughter, he's funny. He ran, he did everything he could. He was, sincere in trying to bring an end to this, when in fact the guy was here as a cover while everything was going on underneath.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Again,
can we go into the NATO thing for a moment? So I played this for the audience. I'm going to play it for you just in case you might have missed it. This is Trump. I believe this was yesterday. And he's talking about effectively putting the screws to NATO, saying pay money or else. And here's the order.
U.S. policy that the U.S. wouldn't defend NATO countries that don't pay.
Well, I think it's common sense, right? If they don't pay, I'm not going to defend them. No, I'm not going to defend them. I got into a lot of heat when I said that. You said, oh, he's violating NATO. And, the biggest problem I have with NATO, I really, I know the guys very well. They're friends of mine. But if the United States was in trouble and we called them, we said, we got a problem. France, we got a problem. A couple of others, I won't mention. Do you think they're going to come and protect us? They're supposed to. I'm not so sure. With Japan, we have a deal, which is a very interesting one. And I love Japan. We have a great relationship with Japan, but we have an interesting deal with Japan that we have to protect them, but they don't have to protect us. You know that? That's the way the deal is.
U.S. policy that the U.S. wouldn't defend NATO countries.
So NBC News is also reporting this, that Donald Trump is effectively doing what he just said he was going to do, that he's mulling over this idea of not protecting countries that don't put in a sufficient amount of money into NATO itself. Now, this is pretty wild because, Trump was like, yeah, NATO should pay 5%. Now, we don't even pay 5% for defense, but by the same token, we pay $1 trillion a year for defense. What is going on with this? I know he has an interest in pulling out of Europe. I know he wants to cut expenses, including the military. He wants Europe to take care of Europe for a while he pivots to China. But this is an interesting way of doing it. Give me your thoughts on this. What do you think is going on here?
Yeah, well, I completely agree with you. The guy was elected by the Uni Party to liquidate some of the U.S. operation, basically cut into the, what's the expression?
To the bone.
Into the bone, yeah.
To the bone.
Scale back. Got a scale back operation. You got, almost 40, what is it, $40 trillion in debt. It's, we need somebody who's going to come in and basically retool, reorient, transform, make it lighter, and swifter, as opposed to this huge, obsolete, outdated construct of a foreign policy, which, by the way, and we spoke about this, we alluded to it last time out, completely ignores that China is rising, not being confronted to the fullest. I'm talking about from the Washington standpoint, confronted to the fullest, in the sense that if you're going to somehow, which to me is ridiculous, but they think like that, to impede China's rise, you have to do it now, not when China will be too strong to even contemplate containing. So you're wasting your time in Europe. And so Trump is using this kind of narrative that I ain't getting what I should be getting here to begin with. We should, the same way I'm going to review all those free trade agreements, which basically, always ends up, screwing the American worker. I'm gonna have to review those defense pacts, and NATO, today looks to me like we're getting a raw deal here, even though NATO has been used as an extension of U.S. power, obviously, but
yes.
It's a shakedown, but he cannot come out, and it's not unlike the situation with Zelensky, in Ukraine. He cannot come out and say overnight, we're out. We don't have to give you any explanation. That would be, disaster, we like this guy. So he has to somehow, and this is the Trump style. You come out with outlandish statements. You put the bar really high. It's like throwing a stone in a snake pit, and watch what happens. There's going to be reactions, and predicated on those reactions, you move the Overton window. That's the first, and then you basically frame the term of the negotiation. See, because they obviously over there, or at least the permanent bureaucracy in Europe, they need NATO more in a way than the US needs it, or at least from Trump's perspective. So the guy is basically thinking that in worst case scenario, we get them to increase, to double their share of GDP for defense purposes, and we get them to buy our own hardware. That's that's the worst case scenario. To the extent they can meet my demands, politically it's all good for me. To the extent then they're not willing to do so, or they're balking, then he can easily say, well, if that's the way it is, I'm sorry, but we have to scale back. That's presentable to the US on top of it. It's like, what are we still doing in Europe? Cold War's over.
It's like, why are we here? I mean, we have like 50,000 troops in Germany. I get the sense, though, that he legit wants to scale back. That, yeah, there's an element of politics to this because you have to unravel something that's been going on for like 70 years. But I do get the sense.
Well, remember that the pivot, when the first Obama term began, was going to be all about pivoting away from Europe into the Pacific. East Asia. And somehow it never quite happened because policy wonks deeply ensconced into the State Department and the think tank blob somehow said, no, not so fast. We've got a score to settle. There must have been like a policy debate, at the highest level in DC. And those people who basically, the Nuland, the Blinken, the Vindman, people like that, they basically were able to win out the policy argument that we can get to China only by inflicting strategic defeat onto Russia. If we do that, we effect regime change in Moscow, we take control of the country, we subdivide it in 22 separate entities along what we've done in the Middle East, right? So that we can easily manage them alongside ethnic and religious fault lines. And we take over all the resources, and then we're in a position 15, 20 years down the road to take on China full out, keeping in mind that, during those 10, 15 years, we will begin in earnest to destabilize China and to prevent it from rising too fast. That was the calculus. Until the whole endeavor crashed into the black earth of Eastern Ukraine.
Wow.
Inflicting, and so now the whole thing looks like that's a strategic defeat onto NATO on top of it. Because if the Ukraine situation does not go the way those people intended it in the first place, when the whole point was that short of taking Ukraine into NATO or providing, like this idiot Meloni said last night, anything that NATO countries get but NATO membership per se, then what's NATO good for?
Right.
So in a way, what goes on right now, the outcome of the conflict actually helps someone like Trump who wants to do away with NATO, because it shows that this thing it's obsolete.
Mm-hmm.
There are 28 countries who basically put all their resources. They threw billions upon billions. They provided their latest gears, and in the end, that didn't make a dent into Russia.
They lost.
Quite the contrary, it hollowed up our economies. It destabilized our puppets in Europe, politically speaking, in ways that would have never been imaginable before the conflict started. And it really put NATO as a concept, as a fundamental construct, in a very, very bad light. How do you justify spending money on NATO now? And Trump is like, okay, fine, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Show me what you can do. If you justify the price tag, then fine, you win the argument. If you fall way short, I'm sorry, I'm pulling the plug. So this is the way they're going to frame it.
I think part of it is also the sense that we aren't equals. We're just defending you. It's like you have all of these tiny little countries that are lumping under the United States for some level of protection. And so it's like, okay, and I think that's why he pointed out, if we needed help, you wouldn't be there for us because you couldn't be there for us. You don't have the military resources. You don't have the militaries. And so for all intents and purposes, it's just us protecting you, with you being like Estonia, that is one of the biggest mouths in NATO. It's like Estonia of all places. It's right.
It's inversely proportional to their militarily speaking non-existence.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, okay, why are we doing this? It's not like if we got into a fight with China or Russia or some of these other countries that you could actually help us. It's just be us in real terms. So I think you have a point. How is Europe going to deal with this? Meaning, Ursula von der Leyen pointed out, well, we are going to do, I think she said $680 billion euro rearmament. I don't think she's looked at the European budgets, but that's effectively what she's saying. And if Donald Trump is indeed trying to pull out, what is Europe going to do for its own security? And will it be able to meet its own security needs?
Well, there's a lot of questions to unpack here. We should do a separate podcast on this because that's an interesting.
Yeah.
What I would say is that Europe, as a political entity, needs to double down. So they need to basically go against, first of all of their respective representatives in all the member states are exposed to their own respective population.
Mhm.
So every one of those Davos babies, the WEF babies, bureaucrats, managers, whatever you want to, goal lighters, they're banking it all out on building the super European federal state. This is what they're gunning for now. And a
Right.
super state, supra-federal state, to the extent it tends to, or it aims to remain politically relevant in the geopolitical order, needs to be militarily peer-to-peer with the likes of the US, Russia, and China.
Mhm.
So you have to look at it in that perspective, I think. In a way, it's a blessing in disguise for the Euro elites, because now they can basically get rid of all their inhibitions about and showing their true face, which is basically to eradicate what's left of national sovereignty and have a Politburo, unelected and illegitimate, basically run the destiny of 450 million people. That was basically always the way it was designed to happen, but the last 20 years they moved in a very stealthy way, and now they can't remain, they can't keep this approach now. And economically, like you alluded to, this it's a disaster. And Europe
Mhm.
is completely deindustrialized. How are you going to build a military when you have no industry? And with what, man? And with what kind of they're going to have to print money. Essentially, they're going to finance this through euro bonds, and they're going to basically pilfer all the savings of everybody in Europe. So this is going to be a big fleecing operation, and this is what Macron alluded to in his own speech. Not that much about taking on Russia. This is political theater, but trying to mobilize all the baby boomer bloc that votes for him, all those boomers, those vaccinated boomers. I mean, they this they'll swallow anything. And they're the one who owns everything. They're the one who benefited from the boom, the post-year boom, economic boom. So they're the one who bought everything for a penny at the time. So the money, you got to take the money from them, not from the disaffected, unemployed youth. They're not the one who's going to be financing your army. The boomer
Mhm.
are. And that's the case, the same configuration in all European countries. Europe is a dying continent. They don't make any children anymore. Yes, so, and they get, and this boomer, they're useful to the extent that they allow you to get reelected all the time because they're very, they after they are, what's mine, it's mine. We don't want some kind of, adventurous politician to take control of the country. We want the safe middle. We want to stay in the swamp. That's where we're at. We like, conformism. They don't want to go away. They don't want to disappear from the stage. That's the problem of the boomers. And
But
they're now in their 80s, 90s.
yeah, they're ancient.
So
But
yeah,
if
but they're
federal
still a
Europe, though,
factor.
but these are different countries. Like they speak different languages. They have different cultures to some degree.
They're gonna
I
do
mean,
away with that. Everybody
and
speaks English in Brussels.
you think they're going to be? Everybody
Yeah,
speaks English. You
yeah,
really
but that's
think they're
the
going to be?
yeah,
Because I know that was the
but that
original objective, right? That they weren't going to accept a federal Europe. But if we
but that
can
was always
create
the
an,
objective. That was always
yeah,
the objective. Always going back to the 50s with Jean Monnet, Robert Schuman, was always the objective. Create a federal state, a federation of states, and call it the United States of Europe. And to your question about what about those cultural differences, the different, you will import a class of managers of the project who are going to be trained to think completely, disregarding those notions, and you're going to, in the name of getting this extra gross GDP point, you're going to say you're not making any children. You've been hedonistic too much all your life, and if you want to keep getting those nice retirement, talking to the boomers now, we need immigration because we need to keep the economy going. And if your own kids are complaining about it, you will tell them, hey, don't complain because I worked hard to get what I have. And this is what you hear in Europe. When kids and grandkids go to the boomers and say, you've destroyed everything. We've got nothing left. You left us ruins. 9 times out of 10, the reply is, stop complaining. Do you think I got this? This came out of the sky? I worked really hard for it. If you work hard, you will get the same.
Oh, that's so sad. That's so sad.
Yeah.
I'm curious, from your take, it seems like Trump is going to give her the sanctions. It seems like he's earnestly trying to end the war. Europe is doing.
But he cannot. Yes.
No, go for it.
Sorry.
No.
I agree. Well, the sanctions. You cannot talk about sanctions relief until the negotiation process begins in earnest on the merits. So until he deals, that's the thing we have to look at. Until he resolves all those logistics that he needs to before he's ready to sit down and negotiate with Russia. It cannot be, he can refrain from calling Vladimir Putin whatever Biden used to call him. Sure, no problem. He can instruct, obviously, his administration to adopt new elements of language. He can occasionally side with Russia on resolution, General Assembly or UN Security Council. At the very least, maybe not by voting with them, but abstaining from going against them. Create this environment. But I think as far as sanction relief is concerned, this is what you actually use as a bargaining tool during the negotiation process per se.
I see.
So it will happen, but not today, probably not tomorrow. It will happen down the road. But Trump has to get this. He has to get this attelage. He has to get this somewhat mechanism, including getting someone with whom they can play ball within Ukraine, who's going to be the Ukrainian face of this roundabout, this of U.S. foreign policy in this region, to be installed, to be selected, to be groomed, and to be put out there as what Biden used to say when you alluded to that general prosecutor, someone solid with whom we can work.
Someone solid.
solid.
Let me
Trump
ask you
needs
this.
someone solid.
Yeah, I agree with you because Zelensky is not that guy. I mean,
No, it's not solid.
Yeah, that's something else. The U.S. and Ukraine are supposed to have talks in Saudi Arabia. I saw this and I thought to myself, okay, is this? It's kind of like somebody sees you do something, and you go to the kid and say, okay, now we'll pretend to do this with you. Is it that? Like, I give you an example. My wife and I, well, my ex-wife, we got married in Iceland. Her family was like, oh, the baby girl, we want to be there for the wedding also. It says, okay, so we will now have one for you that is not real. Like, meaning the first one was real. This one is just for the kids. This is for the other people who didn't necessarily partake in the first one. Is that what this is? Because I get the sense that the U.S. does not want to deal with Zelensky for negotiations. They don't want to deal with Europe. In fact, Politico is reporting that the U.S. is trying to sideline Europe in the negotiations. Okay, well, that was obvious, right? That was the entire point of Kellogg, to be there to babysit. Are these talks just to make Zelensky feel better? Or is there some legitimacy to the talks between the United States and Ukraine? The U.S. can talk to Ukraine any day of the week and twice on Sunday, and has been doing so for the last 4 years. Why would they need to have talks with them in Riyadh?
Well, Zelensky is not going to be part of the equation, but there's an interesting element on the delegation. The Ukrainian delegation is
Right.
Zelensky, chief of staff, and some would say that's right. keep an eye on that guy. They might actually convince him that if he plays ball, he has a career.
That might be the solid guy. That might be the solid guy.
Yes. I'll leave it at that. But this is my perception of that meeting.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
so interesting. Because when I saw this, I was like, okay, why does the US need to have talks with Ukraine? We talk to them all the time. They're like a quote unquote ally, if you want to call it that. And so I thought, okay, well, we had talks with Russia and Riyadh. Ukraine was complaining that they weren't part of the negotiations. So maybe this is the US's way to pacify Ukraine. Not that it's anything legitimate, just to pacify. Your point is Trump needs a solid guy. Yermak is often thought of as the de facto ruler of Ukraine. Maybe that's the solid guy that Trump could use in order to sell this notion of peace negotiations with Ukraine in earnest. Oh, that's fascinating.
So it might be a entrance exam. They're going to try. They're going to probe him. Yeah.
What do you think the chances of that are?
50-50.
That high? That high?
Yeah.
I mean, like I said,
well, because if Zelensky falls, Yermak falls with him. I mean, they are, for all intended purposes, they are attached to the hip.
So this might be Yermak's way of political survival and to pull himself away
for Yermak. Yes.
Interesting. Oh, that's super interesting. I guess we're going to find out. Those talks are supposed to come up soon. Oh man, that's so interesting. Man, thank you for this. Arnaud, man, always appreciate
keep a look. Keep a look, keep a watch on the joint declaration after the talks.
What should we look
and
for?
Read between those. Well, I don't know. We'll see. But what I'm saying is, get a copy of the joint declaration and go through the elements of language
and see how close they align with what Trump is saying and what the Ukrainian side is saying.
Yeah, there will be a tone to it. The tone is the one that is the element that basically tells you what happened or what did not happen. There will be a joint statement.
Do you think there's any chance that this conversation in some way clashes with the conversation between Trump and Russia?
How so?
Like, Zelensky is pushing, I don't believe for a moment Trump is going to give Zelensky security guarantees. No. But is there some, how can I say this? Trump, for right now, has set a context in regards to the language that he's been using in order to try to end the conflict. I'm here for peace. I want to end it. I want to end it. Zelensky does not want to end it. I guess what I'm saying is there any chance that the language that comes out of that communique differs in any way from what Zelensky is saying? I mean, wouldn't they have to toe the line either way? If they deviate, then on some level that's a turn. That is potentially Yermak trying to solidify.
Well, if we read something to the effect that the two delegations engaged in profound and intense debate, which led to productive discussions bearing on where Ukraine needs to be in order to bring an end to the conflict. That kind of language will tell you that there were agreements made, understandings reached. But they're not going to go completely, of course, against what we've been hearing ever since. No, of course not.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Oh, that is fascinating. You've piqued my interest on this. Oh, you piqued my interest. Because I honestly did not know why these talks were taking place. I was like, what is the point of this?
Yeah. And that's a good question. Why the answer is in the question. From the nature of our conversation today on this particular topic, the answer is in the question.
The answer is the question. Arnaud Develay, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. Great conversation. A great conversation. I feel like I've learned something. Arnaud is an author, political analyst, and international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. His latest book is Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of America's Political Consensus. Arnaud, where can people find you, by the way?
They can find my work on 21st Century Wire, especially Henningsen's. I'm a contributor there. And they can find me on X. I'll send you my because it's a pseudo. So I'll send you, and you can put it in the description. It's
Perfect.
Invictus Lex 291, but there's another. Yeah. So I'll send it to you. People can join me there.
Yeah,
but
that's
mostly in my
I'll put it at
writing.
the bottom. Yeah, I'll put that at the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man, thank you for this. You have a fantastic day. Be safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Great conversation with Arnaud. Yeah, Rain Hazelton, super interesting conversation. It was. It actually was. I am fascinated by that. Like I said, when I saw the meeting, I was like, why would the US need to have talks with Ukraine? I mean, if you think about it, the US talks to Ukraine all the time. We shared intelligence with them all the time. We share weapons with them all the time. Why would that need to take place? But if the objective is, oh, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. That's